That's basically one of the worst aspects of social media is we all look at the other person in their moment of victory and think, well, I'm a loser. Welcome to the Aesthetics Mastery Show. I'm Dr. Tim Pierce.
Hi, I'm Miranda Pierce.
And today we're talking about the Kardashians. Fake, not to fake, real, hold back your best photos, curate, what's the right thing to do? Do you have an obligation? We're going to dive into some of the ethics around aesthetics and beauty because it involves all of us who try and create beauty, who curate the pictures that we create and who puts this stuff out online for other humans to make decisions about what to do with their lives.
So this was a few days ago. There was a big furore because Khloe Kardashian had a picture taken of her next to a swimming pool, which we all actually thought she looked hot in. But there was some, imperfections shown. And then one of her team put it out without her permission. Then there was a big PR kind of kerfuffle where they tried to retract it. And then there was a big backlash because we all said, come on, Khloe, stop being so perfect. So this is important for aesthetic clinicians because obviously we put out before and afters. To what extent do you think that humans have a duty to other humans to not put out fakery?
Well, the underlying problem with this, there's many ways of looking at this, and people see this from many different points of views. But the core issue would be if you're giving someone a mirage to aim for, which means they look at themselves and they compare themselves, which people do. Of course, that's basically one of the worst aspects of social media is we all look at the other person in their moment of victory and think, well, I'm a loser. And this is what happens with, if it's not real, you give someone an impossible goal. So, this is the accusation against the Kardashians, which I think is almost certainly a fair accusation, is that if you give someone the idea that they can go from let's say, to make it simpler, a 6 out of 10 to a 9.5 or a 10 out of 10, but that's not real. You create an unsolvable problem for people who are following that example, and that creates suffering, because no matter what you do, you will never be like the Kardashians. And you may think it's to do with having a bit more filler or losing a bit more weight, but it's not. It's about having a really good editor. And really what the competition is between the different photoshoppers out there who can create the perfect situation. And that's very sad because there's real human suffering at the bottom of it.
Yeah.
And I see this even within the aesthetics industry. People will look at a before and after and go looking for the injection technique that will create that. Whereas I know enough about photography just to say that is fantastic presentation more than it is injection technique. It's probably a good injection technique, but don't think you're going to learn the angle of insertion of the needle and come up with that stunning result every time, because there's a lot of work that goes into the presentation. And we need to that's the issue we're talking about, which is at what point does great presentation create an unsolvable problem for the viewer, for the people consuming that content?
I think that's a really good way of putting it. We just can't achieve that standard. So is it her duty then, especially as a very big influencer, one of the biggest in the world, to put out, yes, if she wants, some lovely picture of herself? We all do it. When we go into the Christmas do, we put a nice picture of us looking our best. Should she then also put out the more normal pictures? Is it her duty?
I think you could argue once you've got enough of a following that it may become a duty. And that's only if you are in touch with the suffering that it creates with people who believe it's real and they set out to achieve it and can't. I think if you're much smaller and like it's just you and your friends at school, I mean, it is the same issue, but you're not really creating a culture. I mean, those guys, the Kardashians, are powerful enough to create a culture. And if they create a culture that has built-in suffering because it's not real, then that's something that we need to talk about and solve. And that's why everyone's talking about it, because it does highlight that what they put out there is real is only a small sliver of what's real. And maybe if we knew more of it, fewer people would be in a form of suffering by assuming something is true that isn't.
I think I want to pick up on something you said there about what we all do, though, because I think we're all curating our life to some extent, aren't we? I walk around the garden on my Instagram stories in my dressing gown with no filter. I used to have a filter, but I choose not to now. And just being very honest. But then I don't choose to, put out an Instagram story if we've had an argument or something like that. So I am naturally curating it. But are you saying that it doesn't matter because I'm not as big as an influencer as her?
Well, I think but I mean, even if forget about social media, if your neighbors come around, you curate what you tell them as well. So, we are constantly doing it. It is normal human behavior. I think it certainly gets into a whole different realm when it isn't even your real life. Like if it's been so edited, like there's certainly at least one of the famous pictures of her that went viral that was about 80% Photoshop, because you can see that. In fact, hopefully Shutty can get it up and show the moment of that picture was taken versus the one that was published, and how vastly different they were. And that's where you've crossed the line, is when it's not a section of reality that's amplified. It's not even reality. And that creates an unsolvable problem for the audience, and that means people are left in a situation that isn't inspiring in the way that could. So because there is something worth thinking about, which is the other side of this is, the whole, like, we should love everyone as they are, and we shouldn't ever judge anyone for their looks, and that's a lovely idea. And I think in terms of loving humans as spirits, that is how you should go about the world if you can. But you can't ignore that youth is beautiful, and youth has a value to it that old age doesn't. And this is sad, but it's the tragedy of life. Like, we get older and we get less valuable because we've got less time left on the earth, and we're no longer fertile. We can no longer
work and
give 50 years of our life to the next generation like you can when you're 20. And that's built into why we value youth and beauty. But at the same time, if you create something to aim at that you will never get, you've created a value that's impossible to achieve, and that's where it becomes unethical.
What about the role of aesthetic clinicians generally in society? So how society views beauty. Now, we're all putting out before and afters, and naturally when we say there's a before, oh look, this person looks better in the after, are we augmenting society's view of what beauty is and what we should all aim for?
This is something, actually, I think Dr. Harris says, which is that maybe if you put out a new version of beauty and enough people perceive it, that you might change people's perception of beauty. So there may be something in that. That's quite a hard thing to study, actually, because it's basically quite hard to be certain about what they're after. Is it a cultural thing, or are they really perceiving it as beautiful? Are they associating with status? There are lots of other reasons why people go after things, but if you get it right and you actually create a more beautiful, youthful form, because we all know it doesn't take any training to know when someone is 19 versus when they're 45. And the average person is going to say, well, there's more beauty in youth. You can still be a beautiful 45-year-old, but it's different. So I don't think that we are changing the value there, but what we are doing is realigning it with something that is perceived as more valuable. And this is where the whole culture war really gets started, which is if you say that it's more valuable because then you're also saying the people who aren't that are less valuable. Not the people, not their spirit, but the thing that they represent. If you say a straight nose or fuller lips are more beautiful, you're saying that the other is less valuable, and that's where it gets painful for people, because
say it out loud.
Because we don't like to say that about people, and we want everyone to feel loved. I think most people would like that, but at the same time, we happen to value certain things, and the only way out of that is to destroy what you value as well, and say that beauty doesn't matter, which is also a very sad thing to lose. So we're stuck in this problem where you have to say, well, it's more beautiful. I get a different feeling when I look at that face. It is therefore has a different value to the 90-year-old, and that's a bit painful, but it is what it is, and that's the battle we're in. Is are you going to accept that it's okay to hold up beauty as something to aspire to, or not? But on the other end, you don't want to hold up something that you'll never attain to aspire to.
Yeah, there's a line I think that the Kardashians have crossed. I think the answer is that it's through, I believe, personal development, because if I think everyone should be able to see images of beauty, youth, whatever, and think, okay, cool, that's great for you, but to be honest, I'm not that fussed about my, dorsal hump on my nose, so I'm all right, thanks. And that's the perfect outcome, isn't it?
Yeah, and I actually think most people are like that. I don't think the average person scrolling through Instagram who sees how beautiful she is immediately is crippled by personal insecurity. I think that happens to some people. I think it's probably way more likely when you're 16.
Yeah.
We've got a boy who's coming to that age of self-awareness, and it's really interesting seeing the tiny, insignificant things that embarrass him, which didn't embarrass him 2 years ago, and almost certainly will not embarrass him in 10 years' time. But you go through different psychological stages where these things become almost like they can possess you. And I think that's what people are afraid of is, your 16-year-old daughter looking at this thinking, I will never be like that. What can I do to be like that, and feeling awful about it. But it's very hard to know whether that same emotion is purely created by that, or whether it could be the girl 3 years older at high school who gives that exact impression. Because it's part of that development, but it certainly doesn't help when it's actually impossible to look like that. It's a fake idea.
So as aesthetic clinicians, what can we do? How can we play our part in the non-fakery?
Well, I think there's something to be said for putting out both, if you like. I've seen people do this, which I really like with lips, which is they do their before and after with the gloss that everyone puts on, and then there's a third picture saying this is what it looked like with no presentation, because that shows you the spectrum of presentation, and it's really open and honest. And they can go up at the great picture and say, oh, they look great, and then they can look at the real one and say, well, that's more what to expect. And I don't think you can lose doing that.
I think that's awesome. I've not seen that. I think that's freaking awesome. I think that would really set you apart as well from the rest of the crowd.
Yeah.
And as human beings as well, can we be putting ourselves out in our marketing and sort of showing that I saw a post the other day from a colleague who was talking about how pores are normal, and how you don't need to try and obliterate them.
Yeah, well, I always say in the consultation, aging is normal, and before I do a facial assessment, I always say to people, there's actually nothing wrong with your face. This is what happens to faces as they get older. What I need to do is find out if there's something I can improve or remove that makes you feel great about tomorrow. It's about that psychological transformation, and some of the things I can improve and remove won't make any difference to you, and you need to just tell me I don't want that, because there's nothing. I'm not going to say that there's something wrong with a wrinkle. It's a thing. It only becomes wrong when it's holding you back. So you should, if you can let people choose in that way, it's more empowering. And that's what people say. That's the feedback we got back from when we did our systematic facial analysis with patients, is they would say, you know what, I thought that would feel awkward, but it actually felt empowering.
Yes.
And that's the ideal balance, which is that you're 100% accepting and forgiving of people who don't basically fit the ideal technical beauty mold, because they're happy with it. So it's like I always say with Simon Weston, because he's such a great example of someone who doesn't meet the beauty ideals, but he is comfortable in his own skin, and therefore I would say, as an aesthetic clinician, there's nothing I can do for him because he's happy. He says quite famously that there's nothing he would change in his life, and when you first see someone who's horribly scarred, you imagine that's the only thing they think about. So he has transcended his scars, and they now have a purpose and a meaning built in with them. And you just cannot tell by looking at someone's face whether they've done that or not. And our job as aesthetics clinicians is to find out what is holding someone back and to free them from it, but not to tell them what's wrong with them. And I think what the problem with the Kardashians is there's this implication that these regular imperfections are not acceptable, and because they present such an airbrushed version of reality that to the impressionable mind, it can give this idea that this is where you got to aim for. But we all know now that you cannot get there without a photographer and someone who's good at Photoshop to curate your images, and it's nothing to do with what their life is actually like. So let us know what you think in the comments. I know this is a controversial and interesting issue. I think it's helpful to understand it, because once you get your philosophy in alignment with what you really believe, instead of trying to win the game online, I think you'll do better work, and your patients will like you more, and you'll be proud of what you do in your life. So I really hope this helps all of you become aligned with what you truly believe and conduct yourself in that way, because it's helped me enormously do that in my practice. So let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you next week.
Take care.